Moving on, former Defense Secretary General James Mattis is in Studio 57 for his first live interview since resigning from the Trump administration. His new book is titled Call Sign Chaos: Learning to Lead. In it, General Mattis writes, "I did as well as I could for as long as I could. When my concrete solutions and strategic advice, especially keeping faith with our allies, no longer resonated, it was time to resign." General Mattis served as Secretary of Defense for nearly 2 years. During his long career in the Marine Corps before his service as Defense Secretary, he held key roles leading troops involved in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. General, good morning. It's good to see you. You served almost 2 years. I know you expected to serve 4. How is this unexpected summer going?
It's going wonderfully west of the Rockies, Tony. I'm enjoying life.
Staying out of Washington,
Do you miss Washington?
I miss the people in Washington. I don't miss any of the issues, Anthony, not one bit.
You told our David Martin that the pullout from Syria, announced pullout by President Trump of troops from Syria, weighed heavily in your decision to resign. How did you know that it was time, not only on, well, actually, that issue has reversed itself. Troops are now remaining in Syria. So I'm curious, do you wish you could reverse yourself and go back?
No, I make decisions. I don't have regrets about them. I've always believed strongly that America needs allies. I stand on that because my formative experiences were that whenever we were in trouble, we had allies with us. And I wanted the president to have someone more aligned with his views, so I needed to leave at that point.
What do you think the president got wrong about Syria?
Well, I think when you leave an administration over policy matters, and I laid that out in the letter when I noted the need for allies and all, I think you owe a period of silence afterwards. We have 1 million troops around the world who are trying to defend this experiment we call America. I don't believe that administration officials should leave the administration and then start creating controversy with comments outside when they owe a period of, I'd even call it a duty of silence long enough for the Secretary of State, the President, Secretary of Defense to protect the country.
If not controversy, if not controversy, maybe compliments. This is a book about leadership and a good book at that. What would you say is your favorite leadership quality of the sitting president?
Well, I think we started writing the book, Bing West, my co-author, and I, in 2013. We were on version 5 in 2017 when I was called to join the administration. And it's not a book about the sitting president, so I'd prefer to stay firmly focused on what good leadership is like. I'd led 40 sailors and Marines in an infantry platoon. I'd led 250,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, Allied troops. Later, you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about leadership when you go through that, and I wanted to pass this on. When
and why did you decide to include your time with the Trump administration into this book? Like you said, you've been writing this for 5 years.
Yeah. What I did, Maria Elena, was I put into the prologue why the book had been delayed for 2 years coming out, why it was coming out at this time. And my view is that government service is a privilege. It's also a duty. I was brought up that way, and when any president, Republican or Democrat, asks you to do something, as long as you're prepared to do it, you just roll up your sleeves and you work. You don't get into, wringing your hands and wondering about it. Just pitch in and do the best you can to help support the governance of the country.
Mm-hmm. The resignation letter is in that book, and it's been made public. Was it your decision to leave, or were you fired? Or were you pushed into resigning or pressured into resigning?
It was completely my decision to leave. I had, I believe, a good relationship with the president. I've read some of the stories that we didn't have a good relationship. It was very forthright. I would have time with the president weekly over lunch, private lunch, or in his office. The president knew everything I was doing, and I understood what the president wanted done. There just came a point where I thought he needed a different Secretary of Defense.
The president, the day before you resigned last December, the president on Twitter said, "We have won against ISIS." Secretary Pompeo was here a couple of weeks ago, and he said in some places now ISIS is more powerful than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. What do you think has happened?
Well, the challenge we face today is that terrorism is an ambient threat. It's simply out there. It's going to be there. On 9/11, we were reminded of that right here in this town when over 3,000 innocent people were murdered. I think Secretary Pompeo has it right, and I would leave to those who are in the administration now to speak to the threat.
Secretary Homeland Security Secretary McAleenan told Anthony Mason not long ago that the biggest threat internally is white extremism, white supremacist extremism. Would you say that there needs to be a reprioritizing of defense money toward that threat here at home?
I don't give policy advice from what I call the cheap seats outside. The people in those seats right now have that responsibility. However, I would agree that divisiveness inside this country is probably the biggest threat, the lack of respect, the lack of listening to one another and accepting that even people who disagree with us may be right once in a while.
Do you think this president can heal that divisiveness?
Well, I think that this is not about one person or one administration. This goes back a while, and it's time for at least the majority of us to roll up our sleeves and get to work on what's printed on the coin that every one of us has in our pocket, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. There are many areas where I think we have agreement. We're no longer talking about those. And we need to talk about common ground as much as we need to talk about where we disagree.
And when you talk about this internal divisiveness, that is the biggest threat to our democracy, are you talking about Congress? Are you talking about the politicians being divided? Are you talking about the country being divided? What do you think is the biggest threat to our democracy?
Yeah, Maria Elena, I think it's all of those. I believe what has happened is when we run elections, it's always about dividing. I'm smart, you're not. I'm wise and you're dumb. It's not always pretty. It's not always civil. Well, welcome to democracy. Once an election's over, you go into governance. And it's not about divisiveness, it's about unity at that point. We no longer seem to go to governance. It's like we're in a constant election mode and constantly finding reason to cheer against each other instead of working together. In the military, you could not win on the battlefield. In a corporation, you could not win in the business place with that sort of divisiveness inside.
Right. General Mattis, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Call Sign Chaos, Learning to Lead goes on sale tomorrow.